Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, shows, desolate sources, vessels, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And let's go back to the U.S. of A. And this is going to be part of a series I'm going to do on numbers, videos that have to do with some staggering numbers. And numbers, of course, are fascinating. Not only is it the language of the universe, the language of nature, but it's also what we use to gauge and measure things. And in this case, these numbers become abstracts for real human tragedy and certainly waste. And I guess that's going to be the theme overall, is numbers and waste. And so let's get right to it, because this first story is about $8.5 trillion unaccounted for by the Pentagon since 1996. So in 20 years, the Pentagon has flittered away $8.5 trillion. And let's remember the size of the military budget in the United States. I can't even remember what it is anymore. 4, 5, 6, 700 billion dollars a year, plus the black budget, and then all the associated costs that go into maintaining the military, the bureaucracy, the veterans hospitals, and then of course our ongoing wars and military bases all over the globe. So anyway, it's pretty easy to see in some respects how they could lose $8.5 trillion. And all efforts to effectively audit the Department of Defense have failed. And in fact, they're pretty much the only federal agency that doesn't have to have an audit. And in fact, they cook their books. And so once again, we have this same model is used by government, banks, corporations, the elites, hedge funds, everyone else. They all cook their books, and the Department of Defense being another government welfare program and a semi-corporate entity because of its symbiotic relationship with the military-industrial complex, and that's why we end up with this. So there was a 2013 Reuters investigation and report, and it revealed that missing, wrong, and unknown numbers on a massive scale. And a lot of it has to do with acquisitions. And because they don't know what the numbers are, we get a lot of waste through acquisitions. For example, by 2008, the United States had a 14-year supply of Humvees, over 15,000 vehicles. But between 2010 and 2012, the United States, even though they didn't need them, bought 7,500 more. And of course, we know the reason is because all of that are military-industrial complex contracts worth millions of dollars that are in congressional districts spread out all over the country. So regardless of what we need, our beloved congressmen who talk about all this horse shit about fiscal responsibility and support the troops, and yet they indulge in this kind of shenanigans. So, and a good example of what I'm talking about is, for example, here I do have a number, Department of Defense budget for 2012, at least the main portion of it was $565 billion. Well, it seems like $8.5 trillion over 20 years is a pretty sizable chunk of that budget that just gets flushed down the shitter. And like I say, a lot of it has to do with acquisition. There's a lot of duplication and redundancy because of poor tracking. And another example, this article which I'm referencing, I'll attach below, that also said between 2003 and 2011, $5.8 billion in equipment was lost just transferring it between regular units and reserve units. So that's how bad this accounting in the military is. And you'd be thinking, at least I'm thinking, that kind of with all this privatization, so much handled by privatization in the military, you'd think they would privatize accounting. And in fact, bringing that up is a good point to talk about the fact they also use antiquated accounting and management methods as well as equipment. 5,000 different systems, apparently, and a lot of it antiquated. And that's part of where government waste comes from, is just the constant setting up of a new system that fails, or people can't be trained to use them, or is inadequate for the task by the time it's up and running, and they constantly have to keep buying these new systems. So like everything else in the government, a lot of the money is not wasted anywhere close to anything for running a military. It's just this bureaucracy that just sucks up money like a giant vacuum cleaner. So let's get back to some of these gruesome details. Pentagon, these are all just highlights that they brought up in the report about what kind of things cause this kind of waste. Some of these stories, many of us have already heard. The Pentagon destroyed $16 billion of ammo because it no longer aligned with certain treaties and requirements. But they spent $1 billion just to get rid of that ammo. $300 million a year is missing in Afghanistan. But of course, there's another story that just came out that showed that I think something like $45 billion is missing from Afghanistan. And once again, when you hear those kind of numbers, it's easy to see how $8.5 trillion is missing. We're surprised that the number isn't higher. $500 million in U.S. weapons that vanished in Yemen, of course, and this doesn't count the billions of dollars of equipment that were lost in Iraq and continue to be lost in fields of American wars all over the globe. Look at all the equipment that's being destroyed and left behind in Afghanistan, another example. And we did get a warning of this because in 2001, Donald Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, announced that there was a huge controversy about $2 trillion missing from the Pentagon, and he was going to look into it. But I guess he got sidetracked by one of his other hobbies. And then, of course, the $500 million that was spent by the Pentagon for 16 planes for Afghanistan that were sold for scrap, $32,000 in scrap, or cost overruns. They have one instance where several new ships ended up a cost overrun of $900 million, $1 billion just over budget. And we know one of the roots of that problem is something that we've talked about for years, and it seems like nobody in the government ever addresses this issue. And Americans should be upset about this sort of thing, the massive contractor fraud and overcharging. We've all heard the gruesome stories about $7,000 coffee makers and $600 toilet seats and $2,000 hammers. And this is a standard in the industry because of the bad accounting and the no accountability in military contracts. And the government's just buried in these things. In fact, I think I have a figure for how many, well, I'll get to that because there's the Army has a backlog of 450,000 contracts, and we don't have numbers for the Navy and the Air Force, but that's 450,000 contracts. The government can't keep track of them, and that's just ripe for fraud, opportunity for fraud with that many contracts, and we see a massive amount of that. So you can suspect that a lot of money that goes in the Defense Department is for massive contractor fraud and overcharging. And we see that with all the private contractors that worked in Afghanistan and Iraq to rebuild infrastructure, and in the United States, and the United States taxpayer got taken to the cleaner on all those projects, work not done, just gouging for labor, overcharging for every single service, every single item, and then a lot of work not even done. So a travesty on multiple levels. And whatever happened to the can-do nation? And so the Pentagon is the only federal agency that doesn't comply with laws requiring annual audits. So there's even a law. There's supposed to be an annual audit. And it came up in 2012 because there was a $9 billion discrepancy between what the Treasury said was going on and what the Department of Defense said was going on. Of course, the Department of Defense said that $9 billion in missing money is acceptable. And that's kind of the bottom line with a lot of this. One of the problems with government, one of the problems with bureaucracy, one of the problems with neoliberalism, one of the problems with neoconservatism. This kind of waste comes with the fact that you're spending other people's money. So the taxpayers keep coughing up the money, and there's no accountability. They don't have to answer for anything, and they can spend it on anything, and they can spend whatever they want, to the point we have pallets of cold, hard cash being flown into shitholes like Afghanistan. And so anyway, like I said earlier, in the private sector, of course, when you have these kind of problems, accounting, well, unless you're a bank. But if you have these kind of accounting problems, then you're going to have to answer to somebody. They even had a audit the Pentagon Act of 2013 just to reinforce a law that was already in place, and they've already pushed that back. So now, theoretically, we're going to have a full audit of the Department of Defense in 2017. Of course, that'll be right after Obama gets out of office, so that'll be interesting. But the United States military keeps $14 billion in inventory, back inventory, and $500 million every year is added to this excess inventory. And then, of course, the cost of stockpiling all of this material keeps adding up, not to mention the cost of maintaining military bases all over the United States, military bases all over the world, properties they own and don't use, and just a vast, something on this epic of scale, a government within a government, the Department of Defense, is ripe for this kind of waste. But nonetheless, everyone should be taking a good look at a number like that, because if you look at, say, the last 14 years, we've had Bush and Obama, and then we now have a debt of $18 trillion, and, well, 8.5 trillion of it we could have had if we just hadn't had a bunch of dumbasses running accounting at the Pentagon. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.